But I think a lot of people in creative professions are taught rightfully to value above all else the work, the creative work, as you should, and you should hone that and you should be excellent at it. But I think those auxiliary things, like without the business, without the container of a functional business, the work inside the container just isn't going to go anywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, the joy is getting to design something, but the practical problem is, how do you actually get the commission to design the thing you want to design?
Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for self-employed people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're a creative or soul-centered entrepreneur or wellness practitioner who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hey, I wanted to tell you a quick note about a series that's starting today. I'm doing a series in the Sunlight Podcast on behind the scenes business lessons and some of the best advice and learnings that I've experienced as an entrepreneur. These next couple of episodes are going to focus on really key, exciting things that you can implement in your creative business, in your care-based business. These episodes are especially helpful for you during these summer months, getting your business operations to be as smooth and working as well for you as they possibly can. So I hope you enjoy this behind-the-scenes entrepreneurial series in the Sunlight Podcast. Hello, welcome everybody. I'm super excited today to interview my own dad for the podcast.
It's a family show.
So this is my dad, John Cole. He is an architect. And I don't know, how would you describe yourself professionally, Dan?
Well, at the present time, I consider myself semi-retired doing hobby architecture, which is primarily vacation homes in northern New England. Prior to that, I was a partner in a large institutional commercial firm in Boston, and over the course of my career, worked pretty much all over the world as well as across the U.S. on primarily development-driven projects, which would mean that form follows finance in most cases, that the person originating the project is interested in architecture as a vehicle for investment.
Huh. Okay. That's interesting. So I wanted to bring you on, one of the things that I have always learned from you, Dad, is your sense of strategy in business. Business was never something I thought I would get into, as you probably knew.
Nor I.
And it's funny because I've seen that my path has sort of mirrored yours, but, decades later, you went into architecture, but architecture is hard and you learned some skills that kind of got you through the hard bits. And I would say I did the same with art.
Absolutely.
So I basically want to just frame this episode today by, there's a couple stories I want to ask you to tell, but then really want to gear it towards like you sharing some of that, like really insightful strategy that I have always found so interesting and found that is one of the things I love myself about running a business. So especially for kind of young, solo creative people starting their own gig. So we'll start with a story though.
Sure.
So one of my favorite stories about you in your early career is about graduating from architecture school right into a terrible recession. And for anybody listening who doesn't know the architecture field, it doesn't do well in recessions. So would you be willing to tell that story of how you got your first foot in the door?
Sure. Architecture is a roller coaster profession. We follow closely the ups and downs of the economy, and we're typically a leading indicator. So if architects are starting to feel the pinch, that means typically a recession is 6 months to 12 months away. But anyway, back in long time ago, let's say, just to be approximate, around 1975, I hadn't actually finished architecture school, but I moved to Albany, New York, to be with my fiance, soon to be my wife, who was doing her medical internship there. And I started walking around. In those days, you hand carried a resume on paper and stuck your head in the door of every architect you could come up with. And it was a very depressing scene. And by that point, most firms in Albany, and they were certainly not an exception, had laid off between 75 and 90% of their staff. So a typical scene was I'd be greeted by a receptionist, if they still had one, who would roll her eyes when I pulled the resume out of my folder and say, put it over there and don't expect a call. So I did that for a couple of weeks, left a lot of phone messages, and finally decided, well, I'm going to have to make my own way here. So I walked into the firm of an architect I knew had been a hockey player at RPI, which was an interest we shared as I had played hockey in college. So that was my icebreaker. And I said to him, and they had gone from approximately 35 people down to 2 principals and a secretary. And I said, look, I've got a couple of things going on the side, and I'm wondering if I could rent a desk from you. So I was staring into this huge loft with empty desks as far as the eye could see. And he said, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. Go pick on it. I said, well, can I, pay? Oh, no. Just go find a desk and make yourself at home. So I scurried up to the balcony, found a desk that was not within eyesight of where the principals are hanging out. And for 2.5 to 3 weeks, I doodled and read architecture magazines, knowing that someday a job would come in the door and they would need somebody. And lo and behold, after weeks of gorging on donuts and coffee from the little place down the street, Greg Crozier was the fellow's name, came bounding up the stairs to the balcony and said, hey, do you have any time? We need a draftsman. I said, well, let me just clear off my desk here. I think I can squeeze it in. And that was my first job.
I love that story so much. I think that's so great because it's just like such a great way of thinking about like thinking a little deeper, right? Thinking a little past like what the obvious way to get a job in your case, but also the needs of the people on the other side. So
yeah, it worked. I had a good time with them. Did a couple of nice projects and then went back and finished school, and that was the start of it.
That's awesome. Would you describe a little bit like to say describe the arc of your career? I realize it's a long career and you're still designing, but in broad strokes, can you take us through like the sort of like how the trajectory? Because I know that sort of learning the business skills part was a really huge shift.
Sure. Now, back then, every young architect started out as a draftsman. And that could be excruciatingly boring if you were given the task of doing toilet details or reflected ceiling plans. So the trick was always to figure out how you could move along. Most firms, unfortunately, don't treat their young that well. They're under financial pressure. So their game is to get you good at one thing and make you do it until you can do it efficiently, and they can bill you at a sufficient rate to make a decent profit margin. So my goal was always to think about the things that weren't on my desk. And for me, the advantage that I had over other very talented architects was that I had a degree in English. And I could actually write 2 declarative sentences in a row without sounding stupid. And that is rare in the architectural profession. It tends to be a over jargonization of the descriptions of the work And when that gets translated into marketing material, it usually turns people off.
Can I just pause and say that that seems no different today? And I think it's a symptom of every profession.
Yes, knowing your audience and your message before you start describing the message is really important.
Yeah.
So at any rate, because I could write, I was often pulled in to prepare proposals for projects that were very complicated and represented significant value to the firm. So I was interacting with the principals, with the potential clients, while other people at my same skill level, had their head down in the trenches doing the toilet details. So from that, I began to understand the strategy of marketing professional services. And that was really what helped me eventually become a principal in a significant firm and help grow that firm from what I would call a carriage house trade of 35 architects to a major national player with 185. And to this day, the ability to market is the most important thing in any professional service. Get the job and then worry about how to do it.
Yeah, I think that's such a good thing. And I think it's really hard in the creative fields because it's almost like, I'm curious what effect architecture school had on you in this way. But I think a lot of people in creative professions are taught rightfully to value above all else the work, the creative work, as you should, and you should hone that and you should be excellent at it. But I think those auxiliary things, like without the container of a functional business, the work inside the container just isn't going to go anywhere.
Absolutely. The joy is getting to design something, but the practical problem is, how do you actually get the commission to design the thing you want to design?
Yeah. That's so interesting. It's interesting to me because, obviously when you started, the times have changed pretty dramatically in architecture, like everything that was on paper. We were joking about tips you could give people that would be hilariously irrelevant, like get a great pencil sharpener. But
I have a slight confession to make. I am still a pencil guy. I do everything by hand. I hand it off to a drafts person at a point when the design concept is well enough established. But I have found that a pencil is still the best design tool.
I still use them in my art.
The direct connection of the thought to the paper was something I could never recreate through computers or other technological means. I know there've been huge advancements, and I look at some of these renderings and design drawings now, and I just go, oh my God, how did somebody figure that out? And I just think sometimes the machine takes over. And I'm also struck by the fact that it's easy for someone to get mesmerized by the computer's capabilities and actually forget about the fact that it's human beings who are eventually going to build the thing and live in it. And you have to understand how it's going to get built and who it's being built for.
Yeah, I love that. Like putting the why, the end user, like front and center is like how you make great work. It's also how you get the job.
Yes.
It's funny because I often say when I'm speaking like that, I think, my personal theory of design is that good design is empathy. And I just can't see it. I've never found an exception to that. I feel like design of a mug is about how it feels in your hand and how it retains the heat of the beverage you put in it. And design of a space is how you feel inside of it. And it's all about kind of picturing the end user and their experience interacting with the thing, whether it's, the earrings you put on or whether it's a place you're going to live in and cook dinner every single day of your life.
One of the interesting things about architecture, depending on the scale you practice at, how you create that connection, that empathy is quite different. If you're designing a custom residence, the end user is sitting in front of you. And that's a fairly easy dialogue to ferret out what are their motivations, what are their goals, what would make a successful outcome in their eyes. Obviously, you then, as the designer, overlay your goals on that, which may not be entirely coincident with the owners, but it is the interplay between the two that I found makes interesting buildings. If you were just a draftsman trying to recreate the owner's described outcome, you'd often wind up with a pretty boring building. But if you can say, okay, I understand that, but here, I'd like to add this to the mix as something we might play with. And that's starts a dialogue that I find leads to the most interesting outcomes. But in the commercial and institutional field, you don't have the end user sitting across the table from you. You're designing an apartment complex, an office building, a hotel, shopping center. You have to invent the client. So you do this, I don't know, psychographic profile. And there are actually firms out there that will develop that. We never found that that was a useful tool. But brainstorming who the people are going to use this, who are the interested parties. And it's not just the end users of the building. It's who are the neighbors? What is the environmental position of this building in a wider universe? What are the governmental regulations that will shape the envelope? And from that, you develop your preliminary set of design goals and start to explore the parameters, not so much as hoping for the moonshot design, but just to understand where's the elasticity, where can I play with this thing while it's still malleable, and then work that into a buildable, usable, delightful piece of architecture.
Wow, that's so interesting. It's so many different factors to think about.
Yes, I mean, architecture, I think, has always been of interest to me. As I started out with skills in carpentry, my father was a carpenter, and I had turned from that into wood sculpture, which I enjoyed very much, but I could never figure out how that would lead to enough money to pay the rent. So architecture that was not in my mind in my early going, I kind of arrived at by a process of elimination. Carpentry or building means you probably repeat something over and over, and sculpture meant you could do anything you wanted, but probably couldn't derive an income from it. And architecture was the zone in between where, yes, you had creativity. You also had a structure and a professional setting, which would allow you to develop it into a career. So that's where it went.
That's awesome. Hey, Sunlight listener, I made something special for you. I just created a private podcast called the Money Tune-Up Series, and it is designed to give you some especially helpful business lessons that will unlock some parts of your money and some basic things you've been confused about to move you forward. It's a great time to take care of just a couple key issues that might be what are holding you back from getting on top of your money. So in this series of 4 private podcast episodes, you will learn the 3 secrets to unlocking what has been holding you back from getting organized, getting paid, and growing your money, how to pay yourself so you can keep it legal, build a safety net, and achieve financial freedom. In episode 2, we'll focus on bookkeeping, how to focus your bookkeeping down to just the parts you really need so you can avoid getting bogged down and streamline your numbers. And I'm also going to be talking about the number 1 tax secret that builds your wealth. So this is an episode all about tax shelters. I'm going to go through some math to show you what it actually makes possible for you and how much less money it takes than you might think when you use these. And then in the final episode, I'm going to add a whole bunch of elements together to show you how to reach an amazing sum of fuck you money for yourself when you put it all together. So you can join the private Money Tune-Up podcast series by going to go.sunlighttax.com/podcast. That's go.sunlighttax.com/podcast. You're just going to enter your name and email. And the email part is important because I've actually crafted some emails to send you as you listen to help you take action on the elements. I don't know about you, but if you sometimes kind of intend to do something and then forget a little bit, sometimes that nudge can be really helpful to actually making sure you have the accountability to take the action. So I made this series for you. It is all my very best content for my most excited listeners. So if you are interested in the private podcast series, the Money Tune-Up series, you can join by going to go.sunlighttax.com/podcast, and you can hear 4 extra episodes over there. So I'm curious if I know you have young people that you have mentored before, both at the big firm that you worked at and just in your own personal architecture practice. But do you have any sort of pieces of advice or strategy that you would recommend to a young creative, person starting out in a creative career today?
Sure. I mean, if the creative career is architecture, I think the first decision someone has to make is at what scale do I want to practice? Because the profession is pretty sharply divided between the institutional commercial world and the residential world. So if your goal is, I want to design beautiful houses in beautiful places, that's not the same career path you're going to take if you want to design museums and schools and government buildings. So I'll start with the small scale first. If you like the idea of being close to the craft of building as well as the design, first thing I'd say is go get a job with a contractor. Maybe it's just a summer gig and you're a gopher. Don't worry about it. You will see how a building gets made. And maybe you develop a skill set that pushes you into a design build type situation where you're not only designing it, you're building it. But if not, taking what you learn in the field and then applying it to the design at your desk or whatever, wherever you're working, you will quickly advance beyond the people who have no field experience. In the commercial world, it's a little bit different because you're not as likely to be able to get a job on a high-rise building site. So they don't have many gophers up there walking on the beams. So forget about that. But look around your place of employment, and even before you take a job, ask questions about what is the training program in that particular firm. As I mentioned before, architects aren't good to their young. They tend to spit them out. So if you can find a firm that has a real serious development program where they let you change building types as well as your position in the design process, from early schematic design to design development to construction documents to follow up in the field, that's a firm you want to stick with. If they're just going to have you do one repetitive task, maybe that's all you can find, then the way to advance your career is to quit every time the project's over and go to the next firm and try to parlay the skills into a different aspect. It's unfortunate but true. We're not like medicine where you go through a fixed schedule of rotations to become a well-rounded physician. Mm-hmm. Architects make themselves well-rounded in a much more self-directed way.
That's interesting. Something interesting about your career is you, and maybe you want to speak to this or maybe you don't, but you worked in your earning years, supporting a family, and thanks, Dad, by the way. But you were at a firm that was huge. I mean, you helped to make it huge, but I'm friends with some of the other principals on a personal level, and I know that they would say that. But now you're doing kind of the heart work, like the work that you really enjoy doing just for your own fun. Like, you don't need to work right now. You're retired. You could be retired. But what's the difference, like having your own shingle out working solo as you do now versus, I mean, of course there's a lot of differences, but anything in particular you want to speak to?
At this point, I don't know. This is very applicable to a broad audience. There's no pressure to make money, so I can say no whenever I want. I can take a few days off. I don't have the pressure of, producing a certain income every month. I think that's a luxury that's going to escape a lot of people until they're, quote, semi-retired like I am. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, sure. Well, I will second the fact that being able to say no is how you do some of the work you enjoy the most, and take the clients you enjoy working with the most. Yeah. And that, as you know, I feel a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But I think something I learned in transitioning, well, I didn't transition away from art, but in incorporating a totally different business, doing taxes, that the demand was so dramatically different in one versus the other.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that everybody needs a tax return every year, there just were always clients.
Yeah.
And so it made me realize, like, oh, I don't need to just take every single tax return that walks in the door. I can work with people who I really enjoy and like really, really want to help them in their world.
Well, my dad always said the sign of a good businessman is someone who knows when to say no.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a client comes with a death wish.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And you know it real soon. You don't have to wait till the end of the show.
So true. I have always been like not a very slow to judge person, and I will often give people the benefit of the doubt way past when other people around me have decided. And with clients, I came to learn, like, when somebody comes towards you for the very first time, like approaching you for work, and you have a little bit of a spidey sense or like a bad feeling about it, you're right. Like 100% of the time you are right. And I came to realize in retrospect that this is because that's somebody on their absolute best behavior. At that point, that is their best face, right? And when you actually get into the work, things will go wrong. You'll tell them an amount they owe that they don't think they owe. You'll tell them the building is going to take twice as long to do or cost twice as much.
Yeah.
And so if right off the bat you're getting any sense of, like spidey tingling sense of like, this isn't going to be good work to get into, you're correct, because it means the iceberg below the surface you're not seeing is huge.
But it's hard to back off once you've signed the contract.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. That's awesome. So I want to ask you one more kind of career type thing, which is, I find it really interesting that both for you and for me in our separate generations and careers, that learning kind of marketing, learning how to understand the end user of what we're doing and really have empathy for their needs and experience, and how to communicate that well has been the key, really. And so can you speak to me a little bit about your thoughts on, we don't even like to use the word marketing in the creative fields, but, communicating the value of what you do.
Well, one of the things that I learned, and it took me a lot of long nights and unpleasant meetings to convince my partners, was that architects, and I assume other designers, think of marketing as the sale of getting the particular job. And that's really a false way of thinking about it. That's the end of a long process. The empathy starts before there's a project on the table. So if you're a young professional, whatever it is, your first job is to get to know people who are people who eventually may become clients, eventually may not. But develop relationships that increase your engagement with a broader community and make it known that you are a player, that you have something to say, you have something to contribute. It's evident before the moment when the job, the project is put out for bid. It's way before that you have a pre-existing relationship with either the client, the business entity, the governmental organization, and you can start the conversation on the basis of a well of trust that you've already built up. Coming in cold to try and grab the brass ring as you go by is a moonshot.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's probably why people feel yucky about it, because it is yuck. It's hard to do it in a way that feels good at that stage.
I like to say that marketing is a piece of a much broader spectrum, and we'll call the spectrum business development. And it starts with another word people don't like to use, public relations, which at its essence means being in the community, getting to know people, getting people to know you. That's kind of the baseline. Marketing is making people aware of specific skills that you may offer in different circumstances that could be valuable. Mm-hmm. And sales is the last 10%, which is, okay, here's a specific job. I need to convince you that I have the particular credentials that makes me the best person for that specific job. Mm-hmm. But don't try the last 10% unless you've put in the legwork on the 90% that comes before it.
So true. I mean, when you say it like that, it just sounds like the sort of obvious nature of building a relationship. But I think that's where people go wrong, is when they get out of sync with what feels right in a relationship.
If you're, just focused on the design piece, maybe you're the greatest designer since Frank Lloyd Wright. I don't know. But if you don't have personal relationships, you're going to have a hell of a time getting business. Yeah. So my advice is go out and join organizations that might be of interest to you. That could be an environmental organization, historical preservation, chamber of commerce, and you name the interest, doesn't matter. You're going to meet people and have relationships evolve over time. And those relationships will point you to other like-minded people. And eventually you'll have a whole cadre of people who know you and are interested in working with you. And one trick I learned from a guy who was a real marketer. And he said, whenever I go to one of those chicken dinner, business deals, I only have one objective, and that's to get the business card of the person to my right and the person to my left, and to within 1 week make some contact with them. That's it. You don't have to be the speaker on the stage. You don't have to go buy drinks for everybody at the bar, but just get to know two people.
Yeah.
And over time, that will build a network.
I like that a lot. That's a perfect thing to just a reminder for building a career in a age where it feels like one of the problems that we're young people are facing, myself included, although, obviously there's the generation younger than me, but it's just like this sense of we're all isolated, working from home, this like network and community aspect of the work it's easy to forget when you're working in your, spare bedroom.
That's what I would ask anybody who's in the working world these days. How do you build a network on Zoom? I mean, it boggles my mind. I can't get my head around it. I mean, I think you build networks around, the coffee machine or walking down the street or meeting somebody on the stairway.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there are really successful online networks that work, but they have to have a cadence and a rhythm and meet and do meaningful work together. I mean, you really have to engage.
But how do I know I'm talking to you or some avatar? I mean, I
But I
like to
do.
press the flesh.
No, I
Sorry.
agree. I agree with you. There's really no substitute for like an actual face-to-face interaction. I just paid a lot of
Yeah.
money to go to this conference in New York City so I could meet someone in person, like
Good.
one specific person. And
That's the way to do it.
yeah. So
And for Christ's sake, if you're in a meeting, don't be looking down all the time at your goddamn iPhone.
all right. All right. Moving on. I've heard that there are people who are a little older who do that too, Dad.
Well,
all right. I'm razzing my dad. So I want to hook this in with civics for just a minute, and then I want to ask you for one final story. But just in terms of meeting people and networking and where you spend your time, I want to connect this back to my tax work because I think a lot of people just think of the what's my role part of taxes, like what do I owe and how do I make it as low as possible, which, that's fair. But I really like to connect the dots about like, well, taxes are two-sided. It's the cost of citizenship. It's how we build our society together. And it represents our values as a culture, and doing the sort of advocacy and political organizing, civic organizing that enacts good policy, good values, things we want our society to reflect is critical to taxpaying feeling fair to everyone. And, as many people know, it starts to feel unfair, but it's like people don't look at themselves like, oh, but what could I do about that? Well, I think to me, getting civically engaged is a huge piece of kind of what we all can do. That's sort of the responsibility side, I think, personally. So I just wanted to tie this a little bit to something that I've seen you model to me, growing up, is you have always been really involved civically. So mom is a little bit more on the maybe like activist side of that. And I definitely got that from her too. But you've always been engaged in the sort of like brick and mortar local town. I mean, specific case here is the local town building committee, where over a couple of decades, you have helped rebuild every single school in the town outside of Boston that I grew up in, that you still live in. So
a small town called Arlington.
Arlington, Mass.
Okay, go you Ponders.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, like you've never really talked about why you do that or what you get out of it, but I'm curious if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Well, I've never been all that excited about activism at the intellectual level. I find it frustrating. And I don't like the way this thing is. I can squawk about it. I can send money to various organizations. I can do phone banks, but I can't turn around at the end of the day and say, yeah, I did something about that. I personally did something about that. So for me, the building committee, which I've been involved with for almost 30 years now, was a way to take the expertise that I had gained and put it to use for a broader purpose. I mean, there was no financial incentive. It was, I met a lot of people that were interesting and who have become friends, but I wasn't thinking about it in terms of a marketing strategy. And it was very satisfying. I mean, I can now look back, drive around town, see 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, a high school, 3 fire stations, and a library, and say, yeah, I helped make that happen.
Yeah. I feel that way when I drive around Arlington. I'm like, my dad did that. Not alone, but had a major role in every single Tuesday night of my entire childhood. Was there working on that. So
yeah, no, it's a source of great satisfaction.
Yeah, awesome. And now a huge population boom in Arlington, Mass, because people love good schools and they want to move there now.
Yeah, come check it out. We're better than Cambridge if you're listening.
All right. So I think we're coming near the end, but I just wanted to ask, because I don't know, because you have a perspective that no other guest is ever going to have on this show, but is there anything any story that you could tell or anything that you saw in me as a kid that foretold any of the kind of work that I do now. I'm just curious about that.
Well, I remember in fourth grade, you designed a poster for the library that said, the caption was, "I'm in the mood for reading." And it was a beautiful drawing of a cow. And that was kind of the first inclination I had that you had real talent. And then in high school, I remember you painted a painting of a cello, which was reflected in a mirror. So it was a two-sided image. And it had some really complicated ways of depicting light. And I thought, oh my God, and this is way beyond what I would expect at this level. And then when eventually you went on to a career in painting, that all kind of made sense to me. I think the one thing that was the biggest surprise was the day you said you're going back to school to get an accounting degree because you wanted, well, at that point, a part-time job that paid better than McDonald's. And you thought that
That's true.
doing tax returns between January and April would free up the rest of the year. See how that went. And my first reaction was, whoa, what the hell are you thinking about, girl? And then I started reflecting on, well, what are the skills that Hannah brings to that aren't obvious? And it's really your attention to detail. I mean, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you, but I mean, you're pretty close to OCDC.
I had an OCD as a kid.
I mean, your paintings, have an incredible level of detail. I mean, I remember back in the old days, somebody would, be dotting their drawings, to make all the shading, kind of mindless attention to detail, but in the end, very beautiful. And when I thought how that could translate into taxes, I said, well, Jesus, she's never going to miss a deduction.
I think I use that line in my marketing. Aw, that's funny. Awesome. Well, Dad, it's been such a pleasure to hear your insights. I mean, I've always loved your sense of strategy, and it's just amazing hearing you kind of articulate it outwards towards an end listener that you're not seeing right now. But thanks so much for sharing with me. I just appreciate it so much.
Okay, be brave out there. Design is a great thing.
And if you guys are just interested in seeing my dad's work, you can look at his website, johncolearchitect.com, and can see his current kind of work, quite different from the large scale commercial architecture of 20 years ago, but more fun for you, I think.
Yeah, satisfying in a different way.
Yeah.
It's a different set of problems to solve.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Dad, thanks. I love you. Great. Thanks for being on. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.